So here's a cinch. My wife and I are watching every Jack Black movie that has ever been made, and we finally get around to the 2005 Peter Jackson reboot of the 1933 film King Kong. In my naivete, I imagined that this more contemporary version of the film would certainly have tried to distance itself from the extraordinarily racist roots of its source material, but I was wrong. Peter Jackson's reboot ended up being one of the most visceral racist in feel movies that I have ever seen in my entire life, including the original 1933 King Kong. Now, upon watching this movie, which initially my wife and I couldn't even fully get through, I began to wonder how the King Kong franchise had actually developed over time. I'm kind of a stranger to the King Kong story. I'm not a huge Kong head. I've never been a huge Godzilla person either. I knew that the character had roots in a very racist story, in a famously racist story. I was curious to see what I could find if I watched every King Kong movie back to back, what I would discover about how the character had evolved in US American pop culture throughout time. What I ultimately found is that King Kong is not so simplistically a tale of frightening black male sexuality and its threat to feminine white sexuality, but rather a deeper, more layered, textured, cautionary tale about the dangers of the uncontrolled human animal and its threat to civilized white society. I began to find that you could sort of trace the path of colonialism through these movies, through the ways that these movies talk about King Kong, through the way that they handle Skull Island, his homeland. Ultimately, it was a pretty educational experience about the history of one of Hollywood's most problematic characters, and I'm excited to tell you what I think King Kong has to say about whiteness, and also heterosexuality, and maleness, and privilege, and society. Starting with the first King Kong movie all the way through to the last one, to the most recent one that's been released, from the original King Kong to King Kong X Godzilla, the New Age, or whatever we're gonna talk about all of them, and I'm gonna tell you exactly what I think, and I'm gonna be harsh. So without further ado, I suppose we should start with the initial classic tale that started it all, King Kong 1933. I think that when people talk about the problematic racially charged roots of King Kong, they normally imagine this as the story. This classic tale of this big, dark monkey just coming in and taking your women, grabbing our pure white women and taking them up to the top of the tower. This is perhaps one of the only few King Kong movies that genuinely feels like a monster movie, less so a movie about King Kong, you know? The original King Kong movie is a monster movie. It's meant to be a monster movie, and the monsters have to represent something, and in this case, I would argue that King Kong absolutely does represent the threat of non-white male sexuality. And Darrow, the iconic woman in his hand atop the Empire State Building, is the representation of pure white female sexuality. She's often very passive. The movies like to position her natural beauty as sort of naturally a threat to King Kong and the way that he and the Skull Islanders live. Carl Denham, who is the person who captures King Kong, and all of his crew sort of represent this unthreatening vision of white male sexuality. They all speak to Anne Darrow in diminishing ways. They understand her as lesser than them to some degree, but they are respectful towards her. They don't sexually aggress her. The whole point of their characters is to show us how men should behave towards women. The ultimate purpose of this movie is to create a sense of othering between white civilized society and anything else, and that is more present in its depictions of uncontacted nations like the Skull Islanders, which we'll get into in a second. The original King Kong movie starts with this quote that haunts my every waking dreams, attributed to an old Arabian proverb. Yeah, I looked that up. That's not true. The director of this movie just wrote this and pretended that it was an old Arabian proverb.
Can I read it? And the prophet said, and lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing. And from that day, it was as one dead.
That emo-ass quote is supposed to evidence the idea that white feminine sexuality has a sort of purifying force that tames the savage beast which lives within predominantly bodies of color. And this line plays in my head over and over again as I watch these movies, and I wanted to highlight it right at the beginning because I think it's really important to keep this initial message in mind as we watch the rest of these movies. Ann Darrow is less a representation of white feminine sexuality and more a representation of sexual purity. And King Kong and the Skull Islanders would be a representation of sexual deviance or aggression, or from just social deviance.
Oof.
Yeah. The Skull Islanders in the original film are pretty unfortunately portrayed. The convenient thing about all of these movies is that the Skull Islanders are entirely fictional, so these movies can kind of do whatever they want with them and their cultural presentation. They can be as racist as they want, and no matter what, it can always be waved aside as just, well, this is just a fictional, uncontacted tribe. In this movie, they use predominantly African-American actors. There's also one Mexican-American actor, I believe, who played one of the characters.
Every depiction of the indigenous people of Skull Island that I have seen has been incredibly racist.
Every depiction of Skull Island that exists is incredibly racist. When they arrive at Skull Island, the Skull Islanders are performing a ceremony surrounding one of the girls in their village. When Carl Denham and his crew arrive, and I'm using their official character title here, Witch Doctor, tells the chief that the ceremony has been sort of sullied by their presence, which makes them immediately hostile, which justifies any harm that may befall any of the people in the future plot. They are, of course, immediately attracted to Ann Darrow's blondness as an attracting factor for King Kong specifically, and offer to buy Ann Darrow with 6 of their own women so that they can use her for their ceremony.
The ceremony is supposed to be about King Kong.
Yes, the ceremony is surrounding the person that they are sacrificing to King Kong, who is usually a young woman. The ceremony sort of changes depending on the movie that you're watching, but generally it centers around a young woman, and it is always better when that young woman is blonde or white, because King Kong is more attracted to those traits. That's the implication. And so they offered to buy Ann Darrow, and Carl Denham and his crew say no. And so the Skull Islanders break onto their ship in the middle of the night and kidnap Ann Darrow so that they can do the ceremony with her. I should also say that this is Charlie, their Chinese-American chef. He's one of the crew, and he mostly exists to just kind of laugh at the white characters' jokes and carry their luggage for them, and that's pretty much it.
I just want to say that this movie came out while the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in place.
Yeah, you can see elements of the model minority myth in Charlie's character. You can see this portrayal of him as this assimilated Chinese-American guy, but he's also definitely excluded from whiteness. He speaks with a remarkable accent, and the characters treat him like a servant because that's his social position. He is a chef, but he's always portrayed as extremely willing to help, always happy to be in this position of service, happy to be serving the white guys. It's really disgusting. He is also the person that discovers that Ann Darrow has been kidnapped because he spots one of their bracelets left behind on the ship, at which point he goes to Carl Denham, shows him the bracelet, and says, "Look, sir, me find on deck a native bracelet, crazy black man been here."
Oh, God.
Importantly, and this is a theme throughout all of these movies, upon kidnapping Ann Darrow after she is sacrificed to him in the ritual, King Kong never does anything to her. You could say that that is a problem with these movies not wanting to go there with Ann's character. We don't want to show a white woman on screen getting murdered and or sexually abused by a giant gorilla. That would be really hard for viewers to watch.
People don't want to see a nice white girl get kidnapped a second time and then hurt by a big scary monster guy.
I think that would genuinely be a little bit too far for some audiences, and they also need Ann Darrow to survive in order to service the narrative correctly. I think that's another major point, is that Ann Darrow has to live in order for the message of these movies to really come across, and also no real harm can ever befall her, because she's supposed to be this vision of pure white, untouched, virginal female sexuality. Hi, Editing Harper here. So what I'm trying to say here is that Ann Darrow has to survive through the narrative untouched and unharmed because her presence has to exist as a purifying force for King Kong in the end. It is her beauty that inevitably is supposed to lead to King Kong's death. And so if King Kong ever were to actually harm her, or if she were to die, then it would undercut the movie's message about her white feminine beauty specifically purifying us away from those sorts of urges. That's what I'm trying to say here. These movies can't show Kong doing anything actually aggressive to her, so all they can do is imply, but all it does is undercut the message of the movie because they fearmonger so much in these movies about King Kong. He hardly ever does anything to anyone, especially not without being provoked first.
Just wants to show her the dinosaur.
And that's my personal headcanon. In later movies, they canonize that he's not an evil monster and more of a protector of these people, and I guess you could go with that interpretation. I kind of think that he views them more as pets, honestly. This is just my headcanon, if I'm just taking King Kong seriously as a character. I think he just kind of views Ann Darrow and the other sacrifices as pets, and he just takes care of them until they die, and then he outlives them. And that's pretty much what we do with our pets. Not to mention the fact that this society has been doing this ceremony for thousands of years canonically, and this is the first time that anyone has ever gotten mad at him for partaking in the ceremony. So if you're me, these movies fail to villainize King Kong properly, but that's also not the point, because the point really is that King Kong looks scary and we should be allowed to kill him because he looks scary. But yeah, he does also fight a bunch of dinosaurs. He does this crazy move in this movie where he jams a tree leaves first down a dinosaur's throat. I would also like to mention that the last thing that King Kong does before dying in this movie is set Ann Darrow out of harm's way. It's kind of hard to tell in the frame. I had to get my own screenshot of it, but he is setting her down on a ledge and making sure that she's safe before he dies, before they shoot him with airplanes and he falls off a building and dies. And then at the end of the movie, they show you his corpse really up close. It's kind of disgusting. Carl Denham says the line, "It wasn't the airplanes, it was beauty killed the beast." It's really hard to watch this movie and not sympathize with King Kong, which is why 9 months after the original movie comes out, we get Son of Kong, the white guilt movie. This movie is seemingly entirely focused around Carl Denham feeling bad for what he did with King Kong in the original movie. This film was written by a woman. Carl Denham and the surviving members of his crew are basically being sued out of existence for what they did in New York in the original film. And in order to get away from the costs of all of the lawsuits that they're involved in, they decide to go back to Indonesia, which is roughly where Skull Island is located, because they're hoping to work as shippers and avoid the costs of the lawsuits that they're involved in for just long enough that they can scrounge up the money to afford them. They meet the person who apparently sold Carl Denham the map to Skull Island in the original film. He is a communist, and most of his plot is centered around that being bad. The reason they go back to Skull Island is because he convinces Carl Denham and his crew that there's treasure on Skull Island. And so their thought is, if we go back to Skull Island, first of all, surely the Skull Islanders will be happy to see us after what we did last time. And secondarily, they will surely also be happy with us taking their valuables so that we can pay our legal fees, and then we can go back and everything will be great. So that's the plot. And when they go back to Skull Island, they realize that, first of all, the Skull Islanders do not like them and are not happy with them for what they did. Shocker. But we also don't spend a lot of time with the Skull Islanders in this one. They pretty much have the same issues that the ones from the original one did, so I don't feel like talking about them too much, because what I find more interesting is King Kong's son, so-called, because they don't actually have any proof that it's his real son.
They just decide.
Yeah. In the movie, he's only ever called Son of Kong. In pre-production for this movie, he was called Kiko. So I call him Kiko because I think it's really cute.
Is he bald? In that poster, he looks bald.
The poster is really interesting to me because in this movie, movie, Kiko is albino, interestingly enough, and he also sort of represents Carl Denham's redemption arc. Because he is King Kong's alleged prodigy, Carl Denham spends a lot of this movie helping Kiko out of feelings of guilt for what he did with King Kong. The story mostly centers around trying to provide that redemption arc and that apology for Carl Denham. One of the more interesting things about this movie, and one of the things that frustrates me so much about it, and really makes it a bummer of a movie in my opinion, is that at the end of the movie, there's a massive storm that hits Skull Island, and the entire island is wiped out, and everything dies. So all of the Skull Islanders die, all of the dinosaurs, there's even a cave bear.
What the freak?
Yeah, all of the last dinosaurs in the world get killed. Skull Island is presented as so far back in time that dinosaurs still exist on that land. The words primitive and savage are thrown around a lot with Skull Island and with the people that live there. Of course, in this movie, they just die. They just all die, and there's nothing that really kills them. It's just a big storm that wipes them out. It felt like colonialism in action. It's like the vanishing Indian myth, right? The idea that native populations are just naturally dying out and white civilization is just naturally replacing them. There isn't anything that could have caused it. It's just a natural process by which white civilization wins out and non-white civilization dies out. And so I think it's really interesting that Kiko in this movie is albino, but in the poster, they darken him up a little bit and make him look a little bit more monstrous, and he's also holding on to the woman, which he never does in the movie. So it's to make it look a little bit more aggressive for movie audiences. Literally, Carl Denham just saves him from the mud. They find him in a patch of quicksand, and Carl Denham is like, I can't believe I'm doing this, as he pushes over a tree to help him out. And then Kiko fights a cave bear for them and wins, but he gets a little cut in the process, and Carl Denham goes to bandage his hand, and the entire time he's talking about how crazy it is that he's acting kindly towards this gorilla. You're not a patch on your old man. I must be completely cuckoo to be doing this. Giving you a first aid treatment instead of running like blazes. Guess it must be remorse or something. You see, I'm the guy that knocked out your pop with a gas bomb and then carried him off to New York in chains. I've been sorry for it ever since. Yeah. You see, the poor old geezer got shot at the finish. I guess if I'd left him alone, then we'd all be better off. This is sort of an apology. There you are, boy. 2 good deeds in one day for something that size? We ought to be caught up on our good deeds for a year. This is a theme that endures throughout a lot of these movies, that any time a white person is helping King Kong or doing anything nice towards King Kong, they feel like they have to address the fact that they're being nice to something so scary and big. Which I think is just a really fucked up way to treat another being, but whatever. Because he's literally stuck in the mud. He's not even doing anything. And Darrow doesn't come back from the original film, so they replace her with Hilda. Hilda is only her name in the credits. In the script, they only ever call her either La Belle Helene, which is her stage name, or Kid, which is what her love interest Carl Denham calls her throughout the entire film without once saying her real name. He just calls her Kid. I think it's interesting the way that he infantilizes her.
And Kiko.
And Kiko, in the way that he sort of asserts.
Does he even know that Kiko is a baby?
He's just smaller than King Kong was. This is the giant stone idol where Carl Denham finds a bunch of diamonds that he steals from Skull Island in order to pay his legal debts from kidnapping King Kong from Skull Island. The storm begins immediately after he finds these diamonds.
So Carl Denham is directly responsible for the destruction of Skull Island.
So it's kind of left up in the air. It could just be a storm that happens, and a lot of wikis and people discussing this movie will just say a storm happens. But I honestly believe that the implication is he stole some diamonds from this rock and it caused the sky to rain fire upon Skull Island and sink it into the ground, killing every dinosaur and human on it. We mark this civilization as completely completely
Unimportant.
discardable. These civilizations are allowed to just fall apart and die away, and these movies treat that as a natural, inevitable, and necessary process. And this is, of course, Kiko using his last ever action alive to save Carl Denham's life from the storm so that he can go back to New York and pay his legal fees. Can I also say, the note that they end the movie on is the only people that survive are Charlie, the chef from the original movie. He's still here. Carl Denham, Hilda, or Kid, as I've come to know her, and also just Carl Denham's friend. He's just a guy. Carl Denham sees the diamonds in his pocket and he says, wow, this should be enough to like keep us rich forever if we split it 4 ways. And then Hilda says, no, split it 3 ways and we'll get married. As though that makes fucking sense. As though they wouldn't have more of the money if they just stayed separate, split the money, and then got together and shared a half of the money together. She willingly gives up an enormous fortune to marry this man who she met not a week ago and immediately like took her to Skull Island and who only calls her Kid. So I really hate Son of Kong, probably my least favorite Kong movie because of the way that it completely underplays what he did in the original movie. That apology that I read out is the only apology he ever really gives for what he did. The narrative not only treats him like he is completely redeemed, but also treats indigenous peoples as naturally dying out. Presents this necessarily genocidal view of native populations as fading from society. They didn't make a lot of King Kong movies for a while after that, until Ishiro Honda got the idea to make King Kong versus Godzilla. Ishiro Honda is an esteemed director of Godzilla movies. He directed it in Japan, in Japanese, but he was using parts of a script that were written by an American script writer named John Beck. The original script was not King Kong versus Godzilla. I believe King Kong was fighting a different creature. It doesn't really matter. That script was loaned to Ishiro Honda to use for his King Kong versus Godzilla movie on the sole condition that John Beck could then produce a version using all of the footage that they filmed for non-Asian audiences. And this movie was kind of a hit. The reproduced version was a hit in America, but it's a shame that people in America never really got to see the Japanese version because it's legitimately better. That's why I call this the legend of subbed versus dubbed, because the dubbed version of this movie is atrocious. The Japanese version is probably the best King Kong movie ever made, if you can watch the Japanese version with English subtitles. And the crazy thing is, they released the Japanese version with English subtitles for people who speak English to watch, and then John Beck still took all of that footage, dubbed it over, filmed his own scenes, really ruined it for me. Also, spoiler alert, King Kong wins. So when we're talking about the Japanese version with English subtitles, it's anti-capitalist. It's not extremely anti-capitalist, but it does critique media companies, pharmaceutical companies, and sort of satirizes them in a way that really works for me. Perhaps the most interesting thing about the Japanese iteration of this movie is the way that it talks about human relation to environmental destruction. When I talk about Godzilla, I'm going to be talking about him in terms of the environmental destruction caused by the bomb. If you're curious as to why I'm talking about Godzilla as the environmental destruction which the bomb threatens rather than the bomb itself, the most simple response to that would be because in the original film, both Godzilla and the bomb exist.
Well, because in the original film, Godzilla is created by the bomb.
Right, so it's sort of a misreading of Godzilla to view him as the bomb so much as it is to view him as the environmental destruction that a weapon like the bomb could create. It's a truth that gets obscured for a lot of American viewers. I'm not the person to come to for a read on Godzilla. I've only watched the Godzilla movies that King Kong is in. If you want a better explanation as to the way that I'm talking about Godzilla, I have 2 sources that you could potentially look for. If you're just looking for an entertaining YouTube video like this one, I would recommend looking at We Must Destroy What the Bomb Cannot by Big Joel. But if you're looking for a more academic, scholarly source, you could try Remembering Gojira/Godzilla, Nuclearism and Racial Reproduction in America's Asia Pacific by Yu-Feng Cho. That is a piece that I read while I was researching for this video that helped me flesh out my thoughts on both Godzilla and also on the monsters in monster movies as a whole. whole. It really influenced the way that I talk about King Kong. I say it's an academic piece. It's not the most academic piece, and I think most people would really like it if they read it. So that's my recommendation. King Kong is sort of positioned as this more primordial force, specifically hone in on his ties to human intellect, on the fact that his body is close to us and therefore his mind is close to ours, and that specifically is why he beats Godzilla in the end. The idea that human intellect in its most natural form could potentially conquer the environmental destruction which Godzilla represents. This guy's Mr. Taco. He's my favorite character in King Kong vs. Godzilla. He runs a news media company, and the only reason that King Kong gets brought out into the main world is because he's so mad that Godzilla is getting so much media attention that he's like, I need a monster of my own. Go to Faroe Island. They call it Faroe Island in the Ishiro Honda movies. Go to Faroe Island and get me a monster that I can use. And initially, I don't even think he's planning on using it to fight Godzilla. The plan is to use King Kong to mine for element to make a weapon that will help defeat Godzilla. Ultimately, it's revealed that they are just natural enemies, which I think is kind of a cop-out, and also reveals something interesting about the way that we view hostility. The reason I really have his face up here is because I think that this guy does a really good job acting. He's like a really impressive, physically comedic actor, and in the American version, they cut out most of the best lines, most of the best scenes, most of the best things he does. So if you're gonna watch any King Kong movie, watch King Kong vs. Godzilla, do yourself a favor, find the Japanese version with English subtitles, and keep an eye out for this guy, because I think he's really great. I do want to say, this movie is not perfect. Isoro Honda did put actors in blackface, you could call it brownface, and the purpose of doing that is to provide a colorist other, signify that these darker skinned people are somehow closer to their primitive, violent nature. At one point, the main character guys give the chief a radio, and they play the radio, and everyone gets really scared, but they're like, no, it's like a fun thing, listen, it's music, and then they all start dancing, and that's what wins them over. And I should also say, they gave cigarettes to a child in blackface. They put a kid in blackface, and then the two main characters give him cigarettes. And they keep that in the American version.
If a bunch of white men showed up at...
I will say, because it's a Japanese film, they're Japanese men. So it's interesting, right? Because you can do a similar read. Japan is also not free of a history of racism, which is why I'm going to label this colorism, because I think that the bias in these movies could more accurately be described as colorism, because it's not really about othering a specific race. It's not really about othering black people or about othering Indonesian people. It's really just about othering people with darker skin. These movies reproduce the exact same pattern because that's the roots of his character.
Kind of baked into the story.
Right, exactly. And I think as time goes on, the movies try to sort of diminish this element of the story, but it's really hard because it's so... They aren't willing to make enough creative risks to make these movies not racist anymore, whatever. Before I go into talking about the American version, I just want to mention that there's this juice in the movie that's made from berries on Skull Island that they use to bring him to sleep so that they can carry him off the island.
Wine is berry juice.
Right, but it's not wine. It's berry juice. It's specifically berry juice. They chant around him, he drinks it and he goes to sleep, and then they kidnap him so that he can fight. And the reason that I say this is because the American version is weirdly hyperfixated on the juice thing. I will admit that in the Japanese version, they don't explain the juice thing well enough for you to understand it, but it genuinely feels like the only justification they could come up with for even making the American dub of this movie was if they constantly reminded us of the function of these stupid red berries that really don't matter to the plot of the film initially, but they keep bringing them up in the American version. Not to mention the fact that they cut out almost all of the necessary context, all of the anti-capitalist sentiment. They film these scenes that are the UN talking about what's going on, and it genuinely is some of the worst writing, and it's poorly edited. Let me just give you an idea of what the United Nations segments in the American dubbed version are like. Japanese scientist Akira Markino, winner of last year's Nobel Prize for Medicine, claims to have made a rather amazing discovery in the field of chemotherapy. These red berries, discovered in his latest field trip in the Bougainville area, produce a non-habit-forming narcotic effect. That is not in the original movie. They just added that in for fun. Unfortunately, he reports, the berries grow in only one small, remote, primitive island, and the natives there are reluctant to give them up. It seems animals are fond of this fruit, and the berries are ground into juice by the natives to placate a, quote, mysterious god, unquote, who lives on the island. The god is supposedly an enormous creature that no one has ever seen, but who is rumored to be taller than many of their mountains. Dr. Markino would make no comment on whether such a creature exists or not, but the Pacific Pharmaceutical Company, Dr. Markino's employer, claims he does exist. They also claim that the reason he is such a giant is because he eats Dr. Markino's berries. There is one thing we can be certain of that these berries will produce, and that is a giant advertising campaign. Really, the purpose of making the American dub of this movie is to insert propaganda, to take out the anti-capitalist sentiments, and to further other people of color. I should also say that the Japanese version of the film starts with a line about what if the Earth were to stop, asking us to contend with the Earth ending, which fits with the environmental destruction messages of the film. In this movie, Godzilla is released because an American submarine crashes into an iceberg in the Antarctic and releases him. So the line at the beginning of the Japanese version talks about how the Earth is alive, about how it moves on its own, but in this version they change it to a quote from Hamlet: "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than can be explained by your philosophy." So instead, making the movie just about big, crazy monsters that you can't understand.
And shouldn't even try to understand. Upon arriving at Faroe Island, in the subbed version, they give them a radio just to be nice and give them a radio. But in the American dubbed version, they give the chief a radio and say that it will make all other chiefs and leaders tremble before him and be really scared of his power. And then that is what wins their sentiment over towards them. To make it so that these characters win over these people's affection in a much more violent way, tying it to violence, tying these people's culture to violence, and saying that they will more likely appreciate a weapon than a thing that makes music. They end it with, "Strange enough, we wish him luck on his long journey home," as though he didn't just save the world from Godzilla. King Kong Escapes, the second and final King Kong movie made by Ishiro Honda, loosely based on an episode of The King Kong Show, which was a show in the 70s that I watched a full episode of in preparation for this video.
You're making a mistake. Kong would never.
I did not need to do that. I don't have anything to say about it.
We'll open fire. You can't just...
An evil scientist named Doctor Who builds a giant robotic ape to beat the shit out of King Kong.
His name is Doctor Who?
When the episode of The King Kong Show came out, Doctor Who wouldn't have been a pop culture figure, but by the time this movie came out, he was. In the Ishiro Honda Japanese version, they call him Doctor Who as in HU, which distances him a little bit from the pop culture character. But in the American dub, they just call him Doctor Who, like WHO. They change his name. Anyways, he's an evil scientist. He wants to use King Kong's body to mine for an element called Element X to sell to a foreign country for their weapons. Really interesting commentary on the fungibility of King Kong's body to the war machine. He is rejected from society until the point at which his body becomes useful to us for war purposes. Ultimately, Doctor Who just ends up building a robotic version of him that does the job better anyway, so they didn't even need to kidnap him. And then eventually
eventually King Kong has to fight mechanical King Kong, and he wins. The only thing I have to say about this movie is the thing that I said about his fungibility to lore. It's not a very good movie. It's less interesting than King Kong vs. Godzilla was. Clear cut 5 out of 10 for me. They ended on, I think he's had enough of what we call civilization. Like, why wouldn't he have had enough of what we call civilization? Human civilization has only been extremely hostile to him.
We stole him from his home. Wait, why is there a dinosaur?
Because there's always a dinosaur in these movies. King Kong always has to fight a dinosaur. If he's not fighting Godzilla, he's fighting some other dinosaur. They just love to make King Kong fight dinosaurs in these movies. It kind of represents, in a way, Homo sapiens winning out over the dinosaurs. This relationship between King Kong and lizards. He's supposed to be representative of perhaps the most primitive human nature. Human nature at its most animalistic and at our most prehistoric. His constant, consistent battling of giant lizards and the fact that he wins those fights is indicative of a sort of social desire to place ourselves as necessarily better than the dinosaurs in some way because our civilization survived. Which brings us to the first ever revival in 1976 King Kong, where instead of the Empire State Building, they do it on the Twin Towers.
King Kong did 9/11?
It's so fucking funny. The poster, he's standing on the Twin Towers and there are like airplanes flying around him. Like literally bending in, like, I'm gonna crash into the Twin Towers! And you get to just watch a bunch of helicopters and airplanes fly right next to the Twin Towers while King Kong stands on top of them and goes, "Aah!"
I'm sure that there were people who worked on this movie who were still alive in 2001, and they were like, fuck, guys!
I can't believe I designed that movie poster like that. This movie really likes to think of itself as more empathetic towards King Kong's character. When he dies at the end of the movie, the girl, and I'll get to her, but the blonde girl that he kidnaps in this movie, he builds a better relationship with her in this movie. It's more implied that he's a non-violent animal, and they do a whole big thing at the end where his heart is so big that you can hear it beating from the outside while he's laying on the pavement, and so she can hear the exact moment that his heart stops beating. I didn't like it. I don't like watching King Kong die in these movies. And I think it really feels more pernicious to me the way that this movie sort of feigns empathy towards King Kong, because it still ultimately treats him as something that must be eradicated. He still dies at the end of the movie. Perhaps you could read it as a story about how society just can't handle bodies like his, but the movie doesn't do enough work to make that message work. It ends up just feeling again like, oh, these kinds of bodies just can't exist in our civilization. There's also the fact that the main characters work for an oil company in this movie, but the movie isn't very critical of oil companies. When they said at the beginning of the movie that they worked for an oil company, I was super excited because I was like, ooh, that's really interesting that it's an oil company and not a movie director that's going to kidnap King Kong in this movie. And then they just didn't talk about it because it would not be good for American media if this movie was too critical of oil companies.
Are you going to talk about the King Kong Broadway musical?
No.
You should at least put a picture of the puppet on screen, because the puppet is the best part about that musical. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's
Isn't
really
he
cool.
so pretty?
God, that's way cooler. I wish that I had gotten the chance, especially to read the accompanying novel that came out with the original movie, but maybe that will just have to be a project for another day. Ultimately, I think it would have distracted from this video a little bit. I just want to track his character throughout cinema, specifically. I'm gonna talk about these Skull Islanders. This movie actually makes the creative decision to put the initial sacrifice in a hay wig. It's kind of hard to tell. I couldn't get a really good picture of it, but the hay wig that she's wearing in this scene is noticeably brighter and yellower than any of the hay garments that any of the other Skull Islanders are wearing. So it's absolutely meant to mimic blonde hair. So the implication is that even when they do not have a blonde person there to sacrifice, they put a makeshift blonde wig on their sacrifices to make them more attractive to Kong. These movies continue to highlight the blondness. This is the chief. He wears a baboon mask so that he looks scary.
He looks like an orangutan.
One of the people who's heading the mission characterizes these people as a scared people based solely on the fact that they have a big border wall. You can never say that, right? About Americans, there's the contaminating their magic element, the idea that the white people's presence necessarily contaminates the ceremony that they're doing. I'll also say that in most of the other movies, they have a translator there with them to translate the words of the Skull Islanders. And in this movie, they just kind of guess at what they're saying.
Wait, weird question. They don't use an actual indigenous language.
No, they're just saying nonsense, grunting and hooting and hollering, you know? The audio changes when they dub over the indigenous people in King Kong vs. Godzilla. In the American version, they dub over the people who are doing racist chanting so that they can do chanting that kind of sounds more racist. This is Dwan. Her name is Dwan. In the original movie, the character's name is Ann Darrow, but in this movie, her name is Dwan, like Dawn, but with the W and A in the middle switched around to seem more unique. That is the explanation that she gives us in the movie. Dwan has some really spectacular moments of acting in this movie. I put this monologue here, first of all, because I think it's really funny. But second of all, because I think it really goes to show how much the humans in these movies project emotion onto King Kong, rather than them actually interpreting King Kong's movements realistically. I can't stand heights! Honest, I can't. When I was 10 years old, they took me up to the Empire State Building and I got sick in the elevator. Put me down! You put me down! You put me down! Put me down! Please put me down! You goddamn chauvinist pig ape! What are you waiting for? You want to eat me? Then go ahead! Do it! Go ahead and eat me! Go ahead! Choke on me! Oh, I didn't mean that. Honest, I didn't. Sometimes I get too physical. It's a sign of insecurity, you know? Like when you knock down trees. Such a nice ape. Such a nice, sweet monkey. You know, we're gonna be great friends. I'm a Libra. What sign are you? No, wait. Don't tell me. I bet you're an Aries, aren't you? Of course you are. I think that's just wonderful. He's just kind of looking at her. I was laughing my ass off watching this scene because I was like, girl, he's not doing anything to you. She's kind of a manic pixie dream girl. This is her looking at King Kong's dead, decrepit body as his heart gives out on the sidewalk. Which brings us to the sequel to King Kong 1976, King Kong Lives. Turns out he didn't die. He actually was in a coma. For the last 10 years, King Kong has been in a coma, kept on life support, in a giant warehouse in Georgia.
Why did they keep him on life support?
Precisely the point that I'm making. They do it because his body is useful to science. It is useful to science to keep his body alive for studying purposes. But they aren't able to bring him fully back to life because they can't find another King Kong to do a blood transfusion with him until they discover Lady Kong.
Is that what they call her?
Yes, they call her Lady Kong. Her name is officially Lady Kong. There are two genders. There's King and then there's Lady.
Not even Queen Kong? Like, hello.
Honestly, this movie might be my favorite King Kong movie. It's so fucking stupid. It's so dumb. I really don't have much to say about this movie. It's kind of similar to King Kong Escapes in that how this movie treats his body. It portrays it as extraordinarily normal that we're doing this.
It's like Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah, so they use Lady Kong's blood to bring King Kong back to life. They two are immediately attracted towards each other. They date very quickly, have a son within the span of a week at most, and then King Kong dies. Really, the point is just to bring King Kong back to life so that he can bring his progeny forward and then die. It doesn't really matter if King Kong lives so much as the King Kong name lives because of how useful those bodies are to science. Anyways, this is a picture of King Kong on life support, and that's his son.
Oh, he's really cute!
I normally don't like the King Kong death scenes, but in this one, it's pretty funny because there are like 1,000 consecutive shots of animatronic gorilla faces trying to look sad. After this point, this advent of CGI gave these filmmakers the opportunity to make King Kong immensely realistic. Look at this. You can't mistake that for a real gorilla. That's not to diminish the work that was done on the movies prior to the 2000s. One of the best parts about the King Kong movies, and probably why people love them so much, is the work that goes into the animatronics and things like that. This new technology sort of emboldened a shift in the opposite creative direction, where all of a sudden it was about recapturing the magic of the original. Upon entering the 2000s, we enter what I personally like to call the shift. These movies start to feel a lot more perniciously racist to me. That being said, the first movie from the 2000s that we're going to be talking about is not so much perniciously racist as it is objectively, blatantly racist in many ways. And that movie is, of course, the movie that started it all. The 2005 Jack Black King Kong. The worst one. I hate this movie. Before I talk about how awful King Kong 2005 is, I do want to situate the person who made this film. I know I didn't do this for the other films, but I just want to talk about who Peter Jackson is for a little bit. Peter Jackson is worth over $1 billion. He's one of the richest people in the entertainment industry, and we have it on record that he once sold a private jet because it was just getting out of date. He is the person who made the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which a lot of people love. I personally, I don't know much about the...
It's too long.
They're too long for me. I know a lot of people who love those movies. Some of the same issues with racist depictions, Orientalism get reproduced in those movies. Dedicated to the preservation of World War I and World War II artifacts. He's also invested in bringing woolly mammoths back to life. So this is a man who cares very much about history, but from an aspect of preserving, maybe even reanimating these things from our past. He really, really likes King Kong. And upon receiving the project, he proposed that he do an extremely faithful reproduction of the original film. It's a debatable choice. I mean, it is obviously used to wash away a lot of the problematic decisions that are made with this film. King Kong 2005, so much blackface, oh my god, arguably more than in any other movie. The depiction
it's like Birth of a Nation levels
of uncontacted tribes in this movie genuinely is hard to parse. Extraordinarily violent. They behave in ways that not even the characters within the movie can explain or understand, because they're not meant to, because they're supposed to act very creepy and animalistic, and they really stretch it out. Like I say, this movie is 3 hours long. The original movie is an hour and a half. Because it is such a faithful rendition of the original, it's arguably the most racist film since the original, because it is so attuned to the messaging of the original, which was so racially motivated. In the original movie, they didn't even do blackface. They hired African-American actors. Although they may have done blackface in the final vaudeville scene.
But they were also doing blackface in vaudeville during that time.
That's not an excuse, but that is the excuse they use in this movie, because there are two different ways that they use blackface in this movie. I have screenshots of some.
There's another?
When they do Skull Island, the indigenous people there, the old lady and the child who get the most screen time, they are people of color, but their skin has been darkened significantly. And it's noticeable.
They don't even really look like
At one point, they're
people.
dripping rain on them, and it's smudging their makeup as fuck. Who thought that this would look good? I don't know if it was supposed to look good. But then at the end, when they're doing the King Kong unveiling in New York, they do and we went to the island, and these native people showed up, and then the people on the stage in that scene are white people in blackface doing vaudeville. There are a lot of debates online from people who love this movie who argue that it's okay because they're going for historical accuracy and they would have done blackface during that time. Which, first of all, doesn't really explain the blackface in the actual Skull Island scene, and second of all, isn't a good enough excuse to do blackface. I say this all the time. If there were ever to be a politically conscious way wherein a white person did blackface on screen, it would not be under the guise of a white director. That is simply probably not our call to make. You know why? Because in 2005, white directors were still using blackface and they were using it to do racist things. So we're gonna start with Carl Denham. Look at Jack Black doing his little squat. So this movie sort of has a similar problem as the 1976 reboot of King Kong in that it performs sympathy and empathy towards King Kong as a character, yet treats him very much as a monster within the narrative. And I would argue that this movie, because it's trying to be a faithful rendition of the original, really tries to go for the monster movie element. Because this is a monster movie, the monster has to represent something. And because this story is so faithful to the original story, King Kong just kind of comes to represent the same thing that he did in the original. He cites the old Arabian proverb in his initial presentation of King Kong in New York City. They also end the movie still on the line about it not being airplanes that killed the beast. One of the dumbest lines ever. This movie doesn't really focus that much on Carl Denham. This movie is more so fixated on the relationship between Ann Darrow and King Kong. She is extraordinarily passive. She's blonde, of course. She is homeless at the beginning of the film, and Carl Denham essentially manipulates her onto his boat. He like pays for her dinner and then is like, hey, I'll take you onto my boat. While he's buying her dinner, she has to make this statement. I normally don't accept charity from strangers. You're starving, you need food. Just fucking eat the food. Ann Darrow always has to be this perfect, pure. She's really viewed as homeless by circumstance. The other ladies lining up for the soup kitchen, they're really homeless, you know? And that's why he specifically goes for her. And of course, she is ultimately the only character who empathizes with King Kong. If you wanted to, you could very much read it as a Stockholm Syndrome thing. It doesn't really have to influence your perspective on the story. You could just see it as a woman being naturally emotional, right? There is nothing genuinely in the narrative suggesting that this is a morally dubious act, except for her empathizing with this monster. And it doesn't do it for me. If it's trying to do it, it doesn't do it for me. The Evan Park, Lobo Chan, and Andy Serkis dramageddon. Let's just start off with Evan Park's character, Hayes, who does not exist in the original King Kong. His plotline doesn't exist. They add another white character just to make his storyline in this movie make sense. All it does is pad the runtime. It doesn't add to the storyline. Hayes dies very early on. He's one of the first people to die in this movie.
He's the captain of the boat.
He's the only black man of respectable authority in the film. If you ask me, I think he's invented just to serve that purpose.
Peter Jackson is fake woke.
His character fucking straight up doesn't matter. So remember I was talking about this Chinese American chef in the original film named Charlie? Well, he exists in this movie too, though not exactly. They change his name to Choi, and they change him from a professional chef to a janitor, give the chef role to Andy Serkis and rename him Lumpy, and then they kill off Choi, which doesn't happen in the original movie. So where's your faithful adaptation now, Peter Jackson? Where's the faithfulness to the original now when Andy Serkis wants to play the chef? And all of a sudden it's fine, let's just make the Chinese American character less relevant to the plot and give him a different name. You cannot say that this is not racism, frankly. Here's King Kong. In the original movie, it's almost a fable. But in this movie, they try to make him real. They make him a real gorilla. And because they treat him so seriously as a big gorilla, I think he sort of comes more to represent this animalistic urge inside all of us. And I think I made this point about the original King Kong, but I think the theme is more aggressive. It's more explicit, I should say. What it ultimately came to symbolize for me was Peter Jackson's fear of the animal in comparison to human society. Fear of nature, the primitive. That animalism is tied to our sexuality and to our race. And when those things combine, that's when you get tales like King Kong. You get these cautionary tales about what happens when the animalistic forces of raw male sexuality and black unfettered emotion combine and create a threat for not simply white women, but pure white society as a whole. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
great. So I don't know if you can tell that these two are doing blackface. They hand this child a chocolate bar, and then when they offer it a chocolate bar, it starts like screaming and biting this guy's hand for no reason. In the other movies, they will have at least a conversation with the Skull Islanders. There will be a moment of calm before things go to shit and they start kidnapping ladies. But with this one, it's immediate. It is so instant. They just start attacking them for no reason, and this lady starts chanting, and everything is dark, and they're pounding on drums, and they're opening the gates out of nowhere. For how long this movie is, 3 hours, might I remind you, there's no real time for this to breathe. They just discover that there are Skull Islanders here, and then the Skull Islanders go insane. When Carl Denham is proposing that he wants to do this film, it's set during the Great Depression, so it's like, you want money to make a documentary in a random remote island right now during the Great Depression. But as he's proposing this project to a board of people, Jack Black says that he has found a map to a primitive world never before seen by man, with the ruins of an entire civilization on it. I would just like to point out the inherent contradiction there. Ruins of an ancient civilization in a land never before seen by man kind of goes to show the fact that it genuinely only matters when white humans discover this land. It doesn't matter who lived there before. It only matters at which point white people discover the land. One of the people who he's asking to give him money says, "Will there be boobies, giblies, giblancas, bazooms?" He says that people often like to do this to observe the undraped form of the native girls. I could mention the fact for almost every single one of these movies that Skull Island is supposed to be just off the coast of Indonesia. And even in the movies where it's not Skull Island, the island is supposed to be in that general area. And in most, if not all of these movies, you could argue that the cultural artifacts being worn by the Skull Islanders is not indigenous Indonesian cultural artifacts. But to make that point would kind of be missing the point in my mind, because when they make these movies, they're not trying too hard to create a genuine vision of the sort of culture that might live on this island or in this area and produce it as an other. What they're really trying to do is just fearmonger about the idea of indigenous and uncontacted tribes, the idea of uncivilized, non-white society, and they really don't care what cultural artifacts they use to do it. And I think that's also why in every one of these movies, these people have to be dark-skinned. Even when they're played by people of color, sometimes they have to be in blackface, until that is Kong Skull Island. This is the one where they canonize Hollow Earth theory to the King Kong universe. King Kong, just like Godzilla, which comes up in later movies, actually comes from the middle of Hollow Earth, where a bunch of really big creatures and monsters live. And Skull Island is kind of like the last surviving geographical link to Hollow Earth, which is why King Kong lives there. And they reveal that there used to be a bunch of King Kong apes on this island, but that they're all kind of dying out. After Peter Jackson's King Kong, there was a long hiatus in King Kong movies. I don't feel like there was no cultural interest, because Peter Jackson's King Kong was extraordinarily successful. I do think it may have had to do with the racism, that Hollywood struggled to find a way to revive the series until the point where this kaiju, I think they're calling it the Monsterverse. They portray him as a protector rather than sort of a destructor. He's not posed as a particular threat to humanity, but he is also treated as a potential threat at all times, no matter what. Just because he's big. Just because he's big, so we feel this need to restrain him. He literally only starts attacking these people because they're performing bomb tests on Skull Island. They canonize the existence of the skull crawlers, which sort of become the new natural evil. If King Kong was the natural evil of certain previous movies, then the skull crawlers are the natural evil of this movie. This sort of evil force that we can easily position as naturally villainous, threatening, and harmful without necessarily needing any proof to do that. And the idea is that the skull crawlers necessarily want to destroy us and take over, and that King Kong and his kind mind were always the protectors of humans from those skull crawlers. But now King Kong is the only one left. He is the last thing that stands in the way of the big, mega, ultra, super, mega evil skull crawler from coming to the surface. It's really crazy. King Kong can only be positioned as a genuine subject of empathy within the movie's narrative if he is useful to us. Normally within the specter of war. I gotta talk about the way that it talks about the Skull Islanders. So this is the first instance in any of these movies wherein the Skull Islanders actually get a name. The Iwi. Fun fact, if you pull up an English to Maori translator on Google Translate and type in the word tribe to the English section, the word that comes up is iwi. There is a genuine group of people in New Zealand who call themselves iwi, but I do not believe that these people are supposed to represent the genuine real life people who call themselves iwi. I do genuinely think that someone just typed the word tribe into Google Translate. I can't prove that. The iwi suddenly do not speak. Now that they have a name, they don't speak, which is really convenient because then they don't have to pay those actors as much. And all of the information that we are given about them is given to us by a white person who has just been studying them for years. They will have entire conversations about should we introduce these people to the modern world without once speaking to the actual people who are standing right there. And it's all waved away because these people don't speak. So it's assumed that they don't need to be a part of the conversation. Hello. They're going for a maybe more quote-unquote accurate portrayal. I think this movie really pats itself on the back. You get what I mean by saying that these movies become more perniciously racist. Godzilla vs. Kong, perhaps the most baffling thing that happens in it is that they kill off all of the iwi. Almost all of them.
For why?
Because they want to just have one of them now. They don't want to deal with there being a whole bunch of them. They just want there to be just one of them. The way that they explain away the iwi's sudden disappearance, giant storm. They used the Son of Kong excuse. Just came along and wiped them the fuck out silently, and we don't have to think about it. And the only survivor is this one girl. We'll get to her. I also caught them constantly referring to iwi religion as mythology, which is an unfortunate tradition among white people referencing anything that isn't white religion. In this movie, it's all real. It's all just how it works. It's actually real to the plot of the story, and they're still calling it all mythology.
The mythology of King Kong, and he's standing right
He's
there.
standing right there! If you're gonna canonize Hollow Earth to this fucking movie, you cannot continue to call these people's religion mythology. In this movie, neither of them win. They team up to beat up Mechagodzilla because someone builds a Mechagodzilla. They want to drill and mine. There's a line where they're like, it started thinking for itself. And in my notes, I was like, oh yeah, when the Mechagodzilla starts thinking for itself, that's when you know we're fucked. You can genuinely imagine Donald Trump getting up on the world stage and being like, the Mechagodzilla learned to think.
Drill, baby, drill!
The Mechagodzilla goes rogue. King Kong and Godzilla have to team up to beat up the Mechagodzilla. As I was watching it, I was like, wow, we really can better imagine teaming up to defeat AI than we can imagine native people surviving. We cannot picture a world where the machine of colonialism does not work, perfectly attuned to privilege white people. Fucking loses all of the messaging for me. Humans can team up with nuclear destruction in order to defeat AI? Like, what's the message here? What is the point of a monster movie if they don't kind of represent stuff? Isn't, like, a theme with the Hollow Earth community describing how there's an Aryan community
Yeah, there's an
in the
Aryan
Hollow Earth?
race.
They don't do that in these movies. The Aryan race thing, they don't do that, but... I do want to talk about Gia. She's deaf. Following the theme, if you want to call it that, of the iwi not speaking. She speaks sign language. She's played by an actual deaf actor. The actors who worked with her in the movie also learned real sign language.
Not indigenous sign language, though. American sign language.
That's pretty much where the good part of it stops for me, is the fact that she's a deaf character actually played by a deaf actor. They sort of portray indigenous identity as genealogical rather than cultural, which to me is problematic. Her not speaking is also also helpful because they don't have to center her feelings and sort of just center her entire story around what her white adoptive mother says about her. She is portrayed as being particularly connected with King Kong because she is this last surviving member of the Iwi, and the Iwi just have this natural connection to King Kong. Never mind the fact that she was rescued as an infant and doesn't remember anything about her culture, which is really convenient because then she can't preserve it and she just has to assimilate.
Why did she get adopted by a white mom? Do we know?
She just found her.
So she just took an indigenous baby.
That's kind of the explanation we get.
Okay.
Which brings us to the last movie, Godzilla X Kong New Empire, where it's revealed that the Iwi didn't all die, actually. It turns out people didn't like it when we made that choice. So actually, the Iwi aren't dead. Only the Skull Island Iwi are, but there's actually a whole civilization of Iwi living inside Hollow Earth with all of the giant monkeys. And they speak telepathically. It's not that they don't speak, it's that they speak telepathically, which is great for Gia because now she doesn't have to sign anymore, which is really great in understanding of deaf culture. Her deafness is not an issue anymore because they speak telepathically, so now she doesn't have to sign and she doesn't have to hear anyone. It's perfect because the Iwi spoke telepathically the whole time, and we knew this. And that is also, of course, easier than paying these actors to speak or inventing a new cultural sign language for them to use, which would be really difficult, but I would have at least respected them if they tried for it.
Or using an established indigenous form of sign language?
You know, they could have even just done that. They're intentionally making decisions to not have to pay these actors as much, to not have to do the work of understanding deaf or indigenous culture, because they're more interested in making a big monster movie. Kong and Godzilla have to team up to fight this evil, super prehistoric King Kong, who's actually evil this time, and he's called the Scar King, and he rides an ice dragon that caused the Ice Age, and they have to team up to fight them, and it's just another, they are saving our modern civilized society from the influences of the dangerous primitive world. Just a rehashing of the exact same narrative that it always is. Gia is portrayed as the chosen one Christ figure in this movie because she's seen as a link between the modern civilized human world and the world within Hollow Earth. Just because she's the last Skull Island born Iwi person, she has this specific magical ceremonial role in the film, and it helps her save the world, and the whole time her annoying white adoptive mom is like, I'm worried that she's gonna want to move here and spend time with her community and rediscover her culture. After I essentially forcibly took her as my own. I'm worried that she's gonna want to hang out with her culture for a little while. That would really suck for me. And then at the end of the movie it's revealed that she doesn't want to move down to Hollow Earth. Her home is with her white mom, and it's all just for the white mom's feelings. This movie isn't made for adopted indigenous kids. This movie is made for white moms. We have truly made it through almost 100 years of King Kong movies without anyone ever asking a Skull Islander how they feel. We can basically, at a whim, decide to erase or revive their entire civilization, and that's just a normal thing for narratives to do. These movies misunderstand race. They misunderstand race, but they do worse than that, right? They reproduce really harmful attitudes towards uncontacted nations. I want to take our minds back to the original quote that started it all. And lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing, and on that day it was as one dead. You can find some element of King Kong being, in essence, purified, or of a person of color, i.e. Gia being, in essence, purified by white civilization. No King Kong movie has ever done the work necessary to unpick those roots, and I genuinely wonder if any movie ever could be made. A really provocative, politically conscious take on King Kong. I wonder if that's even possible, because
there's rot at the core of
he is
the story.
A racist caricature at his core, and as much as you try to treat him as just a gorilla, the more you're just going to reproduce these ideas about the divide between humans and nature. You keep reproducing this message message about how we have to tame our animalistic urges and our sexuality in order to serve civilization. And no movie ever made about King Kong can be free of that. I don't know. And to be fair, there's never been a King Kong movie made by a person of color except for the Ishiro Honda movies, which are pretty good, I'll be honest. Like, comparatively, they're better. But even in the Ishiro Honda movies, there were still issues with colorism. I don't think it has been done, and I don't know if it ever will be done, that a King Kong movie will be made that doesn't reproduce these same issues. And I think that it does harm. I think it does harm, because I have seen so many people arguing in comment sections about why it was actually super woke for Peter Jackson to do blackface in 2005 King Kong, because these movies portray these things as natural and normal, and this othering of non-whiteness as not even just normal but as necessary for civilization to survive and to thrive. I have given a lot of thought to how one could do a anti-racist King Kong story, and I have struggled. I think that it's possible that some of these final movies have scratched the surface, but I don't know if the work that's being done with these movies is necessary enough to justify the harm that is being done by these movies, that portrays indigenous people as dying out naturally and as welcoming of that fact. These movies argue ultimately for the policing of certain bodies. No matter how kind these movies are in feel towards these indigenous societies, they always center themselves around this process of othering. The most these movies can do is argue for assimilation, because they can't make a movie wherein humans coexist peacefully with Skull Island. There is no perceived reality in these movies wherein Skull Island could ever exist in its genuine form with us, or where we could change society to accommodate the bodies that it introduces to our environment. They necessarily have to be shuttled away into Hollow Earth so that we don't have to see them on our surface, and we can continue to present this progression, this white civilization, as necessarily more important than indigenous epistemology or knowledges. You know, I think it's easy for us to sort of want to think of these movies as just fun monster movies, but when you take them seriously, you can really start to notice some pernicious things. It does a disservice to us to pretend like that doesn't have an impact. I don't really know what else to say about that. If you like King Kong movies, that's cool. I even have my own personal fondness for them at this point after watching every single one of them. I have my favorites. I really would recommend that people seek out the Japanese version of King Kong vs. Godzilla. And everyone should avoid the Peter Jackson King Kong 2005 remake. Oh my god, it's 1 a.m. Thank you for listening to my video.
Truth, do you have any thoughts on King Kong? No, you just look dumb.